Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
It's Andrew and Carolyn this afternoon on April the 15th. We are so happy to be with you, and we're going to discuss parts of our book, Saving Animals from Ourselves, which is now one of the four books that is included in Radical Regeneration. And we want to speak more deeply and intimately about animals and their place in the transformation of our planet and our consciousness. And I'd like to begin with a quote from one of our great heroes, Emeritus Professor Mark Bekoff, who was a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado. And this is what he wrote in his book, The Animal Manifesto. Our alienation from animals and nature kills our hearts, and we don't even realize how numb we've become until we witness the beauty of nature and the wonder of life. Something as simple as a squirrel performing acrobatics as she runs across a telephone wire, a bird alighting on a tree limb and singing a beautiful melody, a bee circling a flower, or a child reveling at a line of ants crossing a hiking trail.
I love that.
Me too.
And I just wanted to consecrate our conversation, which is extremely important for us because, in many ways, this book is our most personal book. And it's the book, strangely enough, I'm most proud of in our collection because I think it really breaks new ground.
Yes.
Because it's the result of 40 years of our own love of animals, but also our own exploration of the whole situation with animals and our exploration of the latest stunning discoveries about animal consciousness that changed the whole picture in ways that I think we make clear in a way that no one else has done. This book has reached so many animal communicators who have written to me and said, thank you, thank you. We've been waiting for this book.
Yeah.
And we were very insistent that it should be placed third in the quartet because for both of us, I think, the sign of humanity waking up will be taking care not just of the creation, which is amazing and important, but very specifically of our brothers and sisters, the animals.
Right. Right.
And I wanted to begin by just invoking the spirit of someone who is very dear to me, Ramana Maharshi, the great
Yes.
Indian
Yes.
sage who lived on the mountain of Arunachala for 20 years in silence and made a lot of friends, animal friends, up on the mountain. And I want to read a story because he came down from the mountain to the edge of the mountain, built an ashram there. But he used to go up every day and walk, and all his old monkey friends would come and see him, and he would speak to them. But one day he saw a monkey that he knew who got suddenly scared and then bit him. And the devotee said, "Oh no, Bhagwan, are you okay?" And Bhagwan said, "Oh, don't worry, it's not serious. There are 4 scars on this body, all reminders of the honors done me by my monkey friends." And he addressed his old friend and he said, "What do you say?" And Bhagwan heard some noise and they saw 2 other monkeys. And he pointed above and see that pair up there? They were once disobedient, and so this monkey banished them from his tribe. The others rose up in revolt against him. He was so sensitive to this insult of his clan that he left them and went into the forest for 2 weeks. There he prayed, and having gained strong willpower, returned to face his opponents. He sat on the bough of a large peepal tree and shook its branches furiously. And these 2 and all the rest who hadn't respected him were now quaking before him. In this way, he overcame the rebels. So he knew everything that was going on because he could actually speak to them.
Right.
and a very faint sound is heard from the throat of the Monkey King prone upon Bhagwan's lap that he picked up, laboring for breath. And Bhagwan tenderly pours a little water into his mouth from his water pot, but it does not go down. And then very gently he said sadly, "It's over." And this passage always brings me to tears because it's so beautiful. Bhagwan passes his hand affectionately over the head of his old friend, lifting up the corpse and placing it carefully on a stone ledge. The two up in the nearby tree express their sorrow with cries. In due course, the required preparations are made and last rites are performed. And Bhagwan is the greatest sage of India of the 20th century, renowned and celebrated by everybody at his time. And he did something that no one had ever done before. He gave the monkey the last rites due to a sannyasin. It's a very important moment in spirituality.
Yeah.
And then the monkey's body is anointed with water, then milk and vibhuti. A new piece of cloth serves as a shroud, leaving the face uncovered. Camphor is lit and waved before him, as in the tradition for sannyasins. The monkey king's face shines like that of a pious hermit. And then he is interred, and over the burial site a painted stone reads, "Even from insult, these bones protect." So you could speak to the animals, they adored him, and he revered them as divine manifestations. And he, as the living incarnation of the divine, gave the Monkey King the supreme rights of a sannyasin. I think that expresses in a very complete way the relationship that we're being invited to as divine human beings have with animals, so that we can enter into the fullest imaginable joy of our incarnation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I thought that what we would do, Carolyn, is explore the two fundamental themes that dance together in this book. And I never forget when we first sketched out the book, you came to a park and we sat in a room in the library for a long afternoon. And we really plunged deep that afternoon because we asked ourselves the question, why have human beings been so catastrophically cruel and brutal to animals? Why did they lose that ancient connection that you can see in Lascaux and Chauvet and in the cave paintings in Namibia, that ancient connection where animals were revered and loved and celebrated, and their strength and their beauty were recognized as holy? Why did that go? And the answer we came up with, which I haven't found in any other book about this, is that our horrifying treatment of animals is a result of our own fear and hatred and contempt for our own animal nature.
Yes.
And I wondered how that stuck with you, how that rings true for you.
Well, it absolutely rings true. It's the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, about why we treat animals the way we do. When you think of indigenous people all over the world who have deep, intimate relationships with animals, such as Aurobindo did, they recognize their own animal nature and they respect it. They respect their bodily functions, they respect their bodily needs, their humanity. That's the key. They respect their humanity as being in complete resonance with the animal body, with animal functions, and they don't demonize the bodily functions of animal beings. Animals defecate, so do we. Animals have sexual needs, so do we. And I think that Christianity has been a huge force in causing us to disrespect and be ashamed of our animal bodies. And
This is a catastrophe, isn't it? Because after all, Jesus is an incarnation. The word incarnation means coming into the flesh. The
absolutely,
word was made flesh. How did they
yes,
forget that?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jesus, Jesus was, walking around not in a clean white robe all the time
No.
with, impeccable hygiene. He and the disciples were walking around in the dirt and dust and sand of the Middle East. I doubt that his feet were ever really clean. They lived
Good
outside
God.
a great deal of the time. Their major nutrition was fish and fruits that they gathered along the way. So they were very immersed in nature. He and
Absolutely.
his disciples did not sit, in some clean, hygienically, hermetically sealed office. They were out in the raw, in nature. And so
And he
we
spoke
lost that
about that.
connection.
Yeah,
It's all been sanitized by organized religion. And so I think that is one of the major realities that we're looking at in this book.
I think that part of the reason why we've created so much suffering is because we cannot admit that we are animals.
Right.
Because when you do bless your animal nature, bless all of your functions as holy, bless your sexuality as holy, then a whole new range of amazing relationships with all the creation
Right.
becomes possible. And you start to feel this deep companionship, very natural, very glowing, very tender, with absolutely everything that lives. I remember when I first felt this overwhelmingly, I was in Oregon and I was in a center by the sea, and I was walking by the beach, and it's so extraordinary. The Oregon beaches are so majestic. And I suddenly saw a little insect on a stone and the wave coming in. And I picked up the stone and let the insect come onto my palm. And believe it or not, I felt these electric shocks of rapture and gratitude from the little insect dancing on my palm. And I realized, oh my God, not only is this insect totally alive and sacred, but it's filled with emotion and gratitude because it knows that I've loved it and saved it. And at that moment, the universe opened, and I realized that what was offered to us, if we can bless our animal nature, is a whole new realm of astoundingly amazing relationship with everything that is.
Yes.
Have you had a moment like that in your own journey? Has there been a moment when you realized, oh my God, how little I have known of how to love the world?
Well, I've realized that mostly in situations where I've lost an animal, um, because it has been a heart-rending, literally a heart-rending experience. Um, and it's been a time of awe, of not only gratitude for this animal, but it just stops me, as it would, the loss of any living being, like what is life, what is death. But there's something about it with an animal that is, I can't quite say how it's different, except that it's, to me, more awesome. Because I've been present with people who've passed, and there's something about being with an animal. And I think perhaps it's that acceptance that the animal has, not that humans never accept the inevitable, but that animals just kind of, okay, this is a part of life. My ending is a part of life. And I think few of us humans experience death in that way.
It's so strange you mentioned that, because I think I tell this in the book that when I was in my 20s, I was staying with a great friend near a hotel called the Ambassador Hotel in Delhi. And I came out one morning and I saw something horrible. A dog was hit by
Yeah.
a passing car and was lying in a puddle and was clearly dying in a lot of pain.
Mhm.
And I went up to the dog and I was there with the dog, and then suddenly I panicked and I wanted the dog to be saved. So I rushed into the hotel and said to the guy behind the desk, please, please get the vets. Let's try and save this dog. And he looked at me and he said, you're asking me to get the vets to come and save a dog that's dying in a puddle when there are probably at this moment 10,000 people dying of hunger in India. He said, just grow up, he said. He was very tough with me.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh my God, there was a truth in what he was saying. And so I just went and sat with the dog. And what happened was very amazing. The dog by that time had completely accepted that it was dying, that he was dying. And he was more concerned about my pain at his dying than he was at dying himself.
Mm.
And so what he did was he just turned his face towards me and he looked deeply into my eyes, this amazing, open, sacred gaze. The only other gaze like that that I've ever seen is the gaze of Ramana Maharshi and his amazing photographs of him. And he died looking at me, transmitting to me this great peace that he was one with. And it changed everything, because I realized, oh my God, the dog is enlightened. And that I'd never even imagined that an animal could be enlightened. But we know from our own experience of animals that animals have capacities for astounding levels of love and wisdom, that our job is to really attune ourselves to, so that we can stop this worldwide genocide and this worldwide Auschwitz that we are commanding.
And I just want to emphasize again that for those who have not read our book, which was originally called "Saving Animals from Ourselves," we made a great effort um, not to engage in animal abuse porn. We certainly talked about some of the abuses, but we didn't belabor them. What we did was try to magnify the majesty of animals, the supreme intelligence and heart of animals, um, and really emphasize so much over and over that we are animals. It's kind of
You're
like,
right,
you're
because
an
I think that
animal, get over it.
what rejoice in it, because it
Right,
gives you
right.
access to all of this.
Yeah,
Also, the only way we're ever going to stop the killing is by waking up to the rapture and joy of a whole new set of relationships open to us
right.
in the real world, the really sacred world that we live in. We're not going to stop it by being beaten up for it. That has not worked.
No, no,
The only thing that will work is a visionary experience of the depth of what's possible.
right. And The other thing is that I was thinking the other day that this is the first time, I think, in modern human history that we are seeing the kind of efforts on behalf of animals that we are seeing. Certainly the ones that you've been involved with Linda Tucker and White Lions. There are so many. We're going to be talking about our friend Jill Angelo Birnbaum and Moondog Farm. But I was just thinking the other day that there are just so many ways of helping animals that, even when I was a child, were not available. And people did not do the wonderful things that they're doing today for animals. And I just have to mention the Street Vets Project. That's veterinarians who in Los Angeles, they go out to homeless camps every day, and they treat homeless people's pets because the homeless people are not able to do that. And so, I send them money because I absolutely love and bless them. They're doing amazing things for animals on the streets that no one else has done or could do.
As you speak, I'm reminded about someone who really does have this kind of sacred relationship with animals, and he happens to be a very poor rickshaw driver in a South Indian seaside town who's a very great friend of mine. The first thing he does when he wakes up at 4:30 every morning is to go out and share the bowl of rice he has for breakfast with the crows. And they all know at 4:30 to turn up, and he gives half to them. And the second thing he does is to cook a little kedgeree for the stray dogs outside. And they all know to come too. Because what being poor has taught him is absolute compassion for the whole of life. And he does this completely naturally.
Yeah.
But you rang me the other day and said that you'd seen this extraordinary film which exemplifies that, also set in India.
Yeah. Yes, I encourage everyone to watch The Elephant Whisperers on Netflix, which really focuses on a family of several generations of folks in India who care for the elephants and make sure that they're doing okay and keep predators, both human and animal, away from these beautiful beings. And it's not a long documentary, it's maybe an hour, but the commitment of these people to these beautiful beings and the way these elephants have been able to thrive is just unbelievable. So you must watch. I would just say everyone must watch The Elephant Whisperers on Netflix.
What did it make you feel watching it? What did you feel?
Oh. Well, I certainly felt compassion for the elephants, and the dangers that they face all around them constantly, and mostly from human predators, but animal predators as well. And then I just had this awe, this incredible reverence for these humans who've devoted not only their whole lives, but generations of their lives to caring for these beings. They're not the average person. These are
So
people.
their lives have been immeasurably
Oh,
enriched and deepened by
absolutely.
what they're doing. So
Absolutely.
they're clearly
Yeah.
being awakened in the deepest sense by their
Yes.
service to the
Yes.
elephants.
And I don't think I don't think it would be possible for them to do anything else. I mean, this is their whole life. And it's just a stunning documentary.
How would you advise someone to start blessing their animal nature? How would you say, if somebody said, I hear you, and I've had a problem with my body, with my animal side all my life because of religion, because of convention, how would you invite them to start establishing a truly natural relationship with their own animal nature? nature.
Yeah. Well, maybe to just take a moment to sit and touch the body. Oh, and just kind of get used to touching your body, because a part of this whole thing of disconnection from animals is disconnection from our animal bodies.
That's the source of
So,
it.
yeah. And so maybe just, I have this stuff on top of my head, and maybe just looking at your skin. And I don't have hair on my hands. I don't know why that is, but I'm a different kind of animal. And just beginning to appreciate the body. And then, of course, when we're out in nature, that's a perfect place for us to begin to appreciate the body. And, maybe just ask ourselves, what would I do if I had to live here in this forest? How would I manage? What would be the first thing I would do? I wouldn't pick up my cell phone and ask for help. This would be my home. How would I make myself at home? I mean, these are just possibilities, but
I think that right. Start very simply. Yesterday, I'm writing a book on Mary Magdalene and
Right.
really exploring Jesus's obvious sexuality. How could he not have been sexual if he came to redeem the whole of human nature and left sexuality out of it? That would have been a big mistake, which I don't think Jesus made at all, but the church has made. But one of the things that I've discovered over the last 20 years is that there is for example, the Kabbalistic tradition, completely different attitude to the body than in the conventional
Yes.
religions. And I'll give you an example. In Kabbalah, Moses de Leon says, the soul is imperfect and lacking before it enters the body. And it enters the body so as to have the fullest imaginable experience of this world. And then if you do that, marry the soul and the body, then when the soul returns to where it emanates from, it takes all the richness, all the beauty, all the sacred depth of the relationships of this world with it. Imagine if we'd heard that from our spiritual teachers, that instead of the usual rubbish, which is that the body constricts and imprisons the soul, and our whole thing in the spiritual life is to release the soul from the dying body, why not think exactly the opposite? The soul needs the body, hungers to live in the body, because through the body, it can have all of these astounding experiences and know that they too are secretly divine. And then when it goes back to where it comes from, it takes all that knowledge with it and completes its journey because of the body. Just that would shift the consciousness of the world, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And doesn't it ring true of your experience of your own life at this stage of it, that having had a body and a spirit that understood increasingly the nature of life is the most amazing gift, because through the body, we can have all of these unbelievably tender and miraculous experiences with creation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think most Westerners just were born with a propensity to not appreciate the body. Certainly as infants, we're all in the body, and as little young children, we're all in the body. But, I think that around the time that we begin to develop our sexuality and get all these messages from adults about our sexuality, that's when most of us start to become more disembodied.
Right.
And
And
then,
that's
for teenagers, there's all this stuff about, your body has to look beautiful, and you have to, and you got to do certain things to your body to be appealing to someone else. And it's just, it just starts a whole pattern of disembodiment and rejection of the body. One of the teachers that I want to praise, and I know you want to praise him too, is our dear friend Philip Shepherd.
Yes.
It's all about embodiment. And I strongly encourage people to, whether it's through body work or massage or whatever it might be, or a person like Philip Shepherd, to really begin to consciously work on coming back into the body and grounding oneself, learning how to ground oneself in the chaos and insanity that's taking place in our world.
Let's get back before we get to the second theme to the consequences of not being in our body and being terrified of the body and being terrified of our animal nature, because the consequences really are terrifying. First, through that self-estrangement, we are estranged from the whole creation.
Right.
Secondly, and this goes to the core of our book, because of our own unconscious self-hatred, the hatred that we have for being in a body, the terror that we have of the body, we project that terror onto animals. So we demonize animals, and that gives us permission to treat them with unspeakable cruelty.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to go into all of the obvious signs of that unspeakable cruelty, the horrible treatment in abattoirs, the killing of species. I think the people who are listening are sensitive to all of that.
Sure.
But when you identify the cause of it as this terror of the animal nature, then you realize, oh my God, healing your relationship to your body isn't just an indulgent act. It is an act on behalf of the whole of creation and on behalf of the whole possibility of a real divine human future.
Absolutely.
Without that healing, there will be no future, because we will never know where we are, and we will never recognize the beings that we are here with as our beloved relations. And we will go on in our mad, blind hubris, destroying everything and thinking we have the right to do so.
And one of the things we didn't talk about in the book, but I have certainly grown more interested since we wrote the book, is on the topic of trauma and human trauma to start with, because our human trauma causes us to treat animals the way we do, our disembodiment, and trauma always produces disembodiment. And so, we have these wonderful people now who are talking about trauma and showing the connection with the nervous system. And I think that is a place for all of us to begin, is to start exploring, maybe just intellectually at first, our own trauma. And there are some wonderful books. We've got Thomas Hubble who's teaching about this, and we've got Stephen Porges who's given us this wonderful, polyvagal theory, and a wonderful therapist named Deb Dana who's written a fantastic book called Anchored. And in that book, she shows us how to connect with, our bodies, to anchor ourselves in the midst of the chaos that's all around us. And so I strongly advise people and suggest that people check out these tools that are now available to us that maybe even 10, 20 years ago were not available, for more embodiment, for healing the body. We all have bodily wounds, and I have a couple of friends, good male friends, who are in men's work or who have been in the men's movement for some years, and they talked about workshops they went to where they were invited to take a little piece of red cloth and attach it to any part of their body that had ever been wounded that they could remember. And they went off into these groups, and they put these little red pieces on their bodies. And when they came back into the large group, most of the men were covered with pieces of red cloth because they had so many wounds. And I think we could all do that, men, women, whatever. We could all do that because our bodies have been so mistreated in so many ways by ourselves and by other people.
I'm so glad you brought up trauma because we do speak about it in reference to serial killers, strangely. If you look at the counts of serial killers' childhoods, very often they've been very abused themselves, disempowered,
Right.
and take out their trauma on animals first before they get to
Yes.
killing others. And I think this is very significant for the whole human race because I believe that the extent of our current cruelty to animals is a sign that we're losing all connection with life and that the next stage could possibly be massive extinction of humans by humans because you start with animals and then you move to humanness. But fundamentally, this comes from our own trauma of being thrown out of the creation, our own trauma of not being heard and not being empowered with our divine consciousness, the desolation and loneliness and powerlessness that so many people feel in a culture which does not respect life and does not respect people who can't play a dazzling role in keeping the death machine going.
Right. Um, there's such a disregard for life in our modern culture.
Absolutely.
And I think that the explosion of gun violence is part of that.
Absolutely. I think the other part of the book, which I'm very proud of, and we spent a great deal of time, both of us, researching and diving into the amazing material that has exploded in the last 30 years, is the part in which we really lay down what we believe. We say there have been two major scientific revolutions in the last 40 years, which, if we can embrace them, will change absolutely our understanding of the world, the cosmos we're in. First is quantum physics, obviously, because it opens up the world of the mystics suddenly becomes physically proved. The paradoxical world of being and non-being, the entanglement of atoms all over the universe, the fields of interdependent relationship that quantum physics opens up, reveals to us that we're living in a universe that is absolutely magical and amazing and totally interconnected. And that utterly destroys our hierarchies and our fantasies of power because it reveals to us that we don't exist except in this interdependent relation. And the other crucial, for us both, crucial body of research is the research in the last 30 years that has plunged into showing that animals have not only extraordinary consciousness, but amazing powers of consciousness, sometimes much greater than ours.
Mhm.
And this, I'd love to just read from our book because there's just a beautiful section in which this is, if I can find it, I hope I will be able to find it. It will be exactly what would thrill people, I think. I have found it. It's on page 256. For decades, ecologist Caitlin O'Connell Rodwell has been studying elephant communication in Etosha National Park in northern Namibia. I've been to Namibia twice, and Etosha is one of the most amazing places on the earth. A research associate at Stanford University School of Medicine, O'Connell Rodwell observed that elephants seem to detect vibrations on the ground with their feet and trunk. In one of her videos, we follow her as she investigates whether elephants can detect and interpret other elephants' calls through the ground using amplifiers, speakers, geophones, and video cameras. She designs an experiment to test how elephant herds respond to an alarm call that elephants produce to warn others of nearby predators when it is played back through the ground. Elephants can communicate over long distances using low frequency sounds that travel both in the air and through the ground. And O'Connell Rodwell and others are studying whether elephants can hear and interpret those ground vibrations. Of course, they're going to discover that they can. And then Duvall says this about dolphins. Dolphins know one another's calls. This by itself is not so special, since we too recognize each other's voices, as do many other animals. The morphology of the vocal apparatus, mouth, tongue, vocal cords, lung capacity varies greatly, which allows us to recognize voices by their pitch, loudness, and timbre. We have no trouble hearing the gender and age of a speaker or singer, but we also recognize individual voices. When I sit in my office and hear colleagues talking around the corner, I don't need to see them to know who they are. But dolphins go much further. They produce signature whistles, which are high-pitched sounds with a modulation that is unique for each individual.
Mhm.
Their structure varies the way ringtones melodies vary. It is not so much the voice, but the melody that marks them. The deep irony of animals calling one another by name is, of course, that it was once taboo for scientists to name their animals.
Yeah.
When Imanishi and his followers started doing so, they were ridiculed,
Mhm.
as was Goodall when she gave her chimps names like David, Greybeard, and Flo. The complaint was that by using names, we were humanizing our subjects. We were supposed to keep our distance and stay objective and to never forget that only humans have names. But as it turns out, on this issue, as so many others, human beings got it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we go into many, many details of the way in which recent research on octopi, for example, have uncovered octopi as having fabulous, ornate, baroque intelligences which are capable of registering multiple activities at the same time and multiple
Absolutely.
messages at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
When people really open to this research, especially if they combine it with a mystical understanding of unity, a spiritual understanding of the nature of quantum physics, then something absolutely astounding happens to us, which is that we realize that we are in a prodigally creative universe and that we are connected through the grace of our consciousness with all these other astounding consciousnesses. And and this is where we go further, I think, that any book that I've ever read about animals does. What we're saying in our book is this: given what this research has opened up, mightn't we consider that one of the things we're going to need to be able to survive what's happening, well, through our own horrifying creation, one of the ways in which we're going to be able to survive is to adopt a position of real, humble listening and opening to these foreign new consciousnesses, which we now realize are open, so that we can be instructed and helped by them
Yes.
to
Yes.
understand things that we would never be able to understand within the limitations of the consciousness that we think is so fantastic.
Right.
So animals turn out not just to be providers of unconditional love, not just to be miraculous beings in their own right, but
Mhm.
they turn out, as many of the indigenous traditions have understood them to be, turn out to be potential guides into new forms of discovery, new forms of intelligence that we need like oxygen to keep the human race alive.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
That is truly amazing. And I'd really like to talk about our friend Jill. and Moondog Farm as we sing her praises at the end of our book. And maybe we could conclude our conversation today with talking about her as an example. You know, she's one of many examples. And people who want to do something on behalf of animals, you know, none of us has to believe that, well, we have to go open some rescue operation or anything like that. We don't have to, go to Africa and save the elephants, but there are small things that we can all do in our own lives, in our own communities on behalf of animals. But let's talk about Jill.
Well, I think, everything that we've said really is an invitation to anyone who's listening to do one of those small things. And I would strongly, tenderly recommend that everybody looks up Jill Angelo Birnbaum and Moondog Farm and considers starting to donate to her enterprise.
Yes.
Jill lives in a little farm in Indiana with her wonderful husband, and the two of them look after guinea pigs and dogs that have been through hell.
Yeah.
And she has also a pig who is
Yeah.
very sick at this
Elmer.
moment. Elmer, whom
Elmer.
I wanted her to call Meister Eckhart, but she decided on Elmer, which was probably a better name. Jill's example of heroic love is something that fills my life with inspiration. And I see Jill, and I've known Jill for a long time. I don't just see her as somebody championing animals. I see how her love for animals has allowed animal intelligence to deepen and expand her, to ground
Yes.
her.
Yes.
She gets from them as much as she gives.
Yes.
And in turning up to be a magnificent advocate for them, she has also, over the years, taken from them deep sacred lessons in compassion and generosity,
Mhm.
which have filled her own life and healed her of many painful traumas that she has been through. So I've watched this amazing transformation.
Mhm.
And I cannot tell anybody who's listening enough just how wonderful Jill is, how wonderful the work that she's doing, but also how extraordinarily practical it is for anybody who listening who might not have a lot of means but might suddenly be inspired to really go and bring into their lives 3 or 4 more animals than they ever thought they could, in imitation of this model that she's now modeling in Moondog Farm and that a lot of people are catching deep inspiration from.
And
So
there's,
go.
even simpler things like, there are people who go to animal shelters and read stories to the dogs, you know, and it's a way of not only entertaining the dogs and giving them some focus as they're kind of pacing around and what's going to happen to me and all of that, but it's so good for the humans. So there are
Exactly.
many ways that we can volunteer to serve on behalf of animals. There
Serve
are countless
ourselves, our
ways.
future evolution by beginning to, like blind people to doing Braille, to start learning a new set of relationships that could immeasurably transform us.
Absolutely.
Shall I end by just reading you that last bit that Jill says in her wonderful interview at the
Sure.
end of our book? Because it really does absolutely sum it up. What advice would you offer to people? I ask her, and she says, it's typical Jill. She says more in 6 lines than most people say in a week. Best of all, adopt an animal. If you can't adopt, foster. If you can't foster, sponsor. If you can't sponsor, volunteer. If you can't volunteer, donate. If you can't donate, educate. Don't ever tell me you can't help. There is always something you can do. Given what is now happening to animals everywhere, help is desperately needed.
Yes. Yes.
So shall we end by that prayer of Albert Schweitzer? Would you like to read it, my darling? Have you got a copy?
I don't have a
3-5.
copy in front of me. Please feel free.
Hear our humble prayer, O God, for our friends, the animals, especially for animals who are suffering, for animals that are overworked, underfed, and cruelly treated. For all wistful creatures in captivity that beat their wings against bars, for any that are hunted or lost or deserted or frightened or hungry, for all that must be put to death. We entreat for them all thy mercy and pity, and for those who deal with them we ask a heart of compassion and gentle hands and kindly words. Make us ourselves to be true friends to animals, and so to share the blessings of the merciful. My dear friends, I hope that we've been able to give you just a taste of the vision that we're presenting in this part of the book, and that it will inspire you to dive into radical regeneration and offer the book to all those whom you know love animals and are beginning to understand just what that love can open up to them. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Andrew, for this conversation. It's been wonderful to be with you again.
Wonderful to be with you, darling. And love to Gordon, your beloved.
Thank you so much.